No worries. Thank you so much, guys, for taking your time off on a Sunday evening and joining. I'm really hoping that this session would be something that would, we will have some takeaways from this session. I won't keep you guys here for long. So I'm aiming to wrap this up within the first 60 minutes so that in the second 60 minutes, we can do some Q&A. Okay, and today we are going to talk about how we can deploy certificates via Intune, the various ways we can do it, the various determinations, and the various troubleshooting scenarios that are involved therein. Okay. So guys, my name is Saurabh Sarkar. I'm a beta engineer in Microsoft, and I've been working on Intune for around past 3 years. And a recording of this session is available in case you guys would like to have a look over the recording. It's available in my YouTube channel, which is everything about Intune. Okay. All right. Perfect. So let's just get started. So today, as I said, we are going to talk about deploying certificates via Intune. And well, it obviously brings us to the question that why do we exactly need the certificates, right? There must be some need. And again, a very basic point. So let's just say that I have a device, may that be a mobile device, may that be a laptop. And the intent is I want to authenticate to, let's just say, VPN or let's just say Wi-Fi. Okay. So that authentication can be done by using something called a username and password. But we all know that in an enterprise situation or in an enterprise setup, using username and password is not the best or the most secured or the most seamless approach, right? So to prove one's identity is where certificates come in. And as you can see, it says that it is used to achieve the authentication phase, right? So instead of entering the username and password, if we want that to be automated, that is wherein the deployment of certificates comes into the picture. This is something which we already know, right? The usage of certificates facilitating the seamless authentication. Now, if we have to, so the whole concept or the whole funda here is we are trying to move a certificate from a on-premise certification authority, which is there in the intranet, to a device which is there in the internet. This is the entire logic here. So right now, we are not deploying a certificate from any third-party hosted certificate location. We can still do that if we want. We can deploy certificates from, let's just say, Semantic as well. But right now, let's just say that we already have our on-premise setup. We already have a domain controller. We already have a CA, which is obviously there joined to our on-premise domain. How do I move a certificate from that CA to a mobile device? Obviously, let's just say I have an iPhone and I want to move that certificate to that iPhone. How do I do that? My iPhone cannot be joined to the on-premise domain, right? Or let's just say that I have a Windows 10 laptop and I want to move that certificate to that Windows 10 laptop. How do I do that? Given that that Windows 10 laptop is there in the internet and not in the intranet, right? So this is the entire intent here. And the way we do it is using something called Intune, which is Microsoft's MDM on Azure. So given that Intune works on the internet, Intune is able to talk to the device, as well as Intune is able to talk to the CA and hence deliver that certificate. How that happens, we will talk about the flow later on. But this is the entire background of the concept here, that why exactly are we talking of a situation wherein we will have to move a certificate from your on-prem CA to a mobile device. Obviously, we cannot do it by using group policy, right? Because the device is not there in the domain. You cannot deploy a group policy to an Android or to an Android device or to an iPhone, right? Hence, Intune comes to the rescue. Okay, that is the intent here. So when we are deploying a certificate from Intune, there are two ways. There are two kinds, if I would divide it that way. One is PKCS and one is SCEP. And today we are going to, get 1,000 feet overview of what PKCS is and what SCEP is, what is the difference, which one to use and when. Okay. Both are used to achieve the same goal. And what is that goal? The goal is facilitating seamless authentication and deploying a certificate from the CA in the intranet to a device in the internet. Okay. Which one to use? We'll go through that. But then this is a determination which the certification, which the CA admin has to make. From our standpoint, our responsibility would be deploying a certificate. Now, which certificate has to be deployed? This is something which the CA admin would decide, or this which is something which your network admin would decide, that what kind of certificate is he looking for in order to facilitate authentication to their Radius server. Okay, what can this certificate what can we do using this certificate? Well, the most common use case is authentication to VPN and authentication to Wi-Fi. So when we are authenticating to Wi-Fi, what we are actually doing is we are the user is proving his authenticity, right? So it's actually being used for user authentication. It can be used for server authentication as well, and it can be used for encrypting email, which is, I mean, there is a different approach for it. There's something called S-MIME, which we can use to encrypt an email. What that does is, if I'm sending an email, if a person A is sending an email to person B, then only person B can decrypt that email and read it if he has the certificate which is needed to decrypt it. So, again, our responsibility is pushing that certificate. Once that certificate is down at the device end, it can be leveraged for VPN or for Wi-Fi or for email. Depending upon what the use case is. Right. So first we are going to touch base on what PKCS is, then we will touch base on SCEP. Again, this is going to be a 1,000-feet overview of PKCS and SCEP because these two are very detailed technology in itself, and it has got a lot of moving components. But I mean, the intent of the session is just to introduce you guys to PKCS and SCEP so that you guys know that these two technologies exist, so that tomorrow, if you are going ahead with the deployment, you guys know which one to use and why. Okay. So PKCS, so you guys will hear these two terms interchangeably, PFX or PKCS 12, both mean the same thing. And it is actually a standard which was initially developed by Microsoft, but now it is an open standard. In a PFX or a PKCS certificate, it contains both the public and the private key, and the private key is marked as exportable. So this last point is something that we will talk about a little bit more in detail. And this is one of the determining factors which the CA admin keeps in mind while deciding whether he wants to make use of PKCS or whether he wants to make use of SCEP. Okay, so this is like you would call one of the differences between PKCS and SCEP. In PKCS or in PFX, the private key is marked as exportable. You have that option. If you are familiar with certificate templates, you would have seen that when you are creating a certificate template, there is that radio button or a checkbox which tells you whether you want to make the private key as exportable or not. In case of PFX, it is marked as exportable. In case of SCEP, it is not. What does that mean? We will talk about that in a while. Okay, so again, this slide would actually make more sense once we have spoken about what SCEP is, because it in a way is comparing PKCS with SCEP. So I would skip this slide for now, and I would come to the flow of how exactly this is happening. So this is again a 1,000-feet overview. I know this is not the prettiest looking diagram that you guys would have seen, but I mean, this is just breaking down. This would be a 1,000-feet overview, or this is just a block diagram. So over here, I have a device. The device is there in the internet, and obviously Intune service is there as well. The device is enrolled to the Intune service. Okay. And on the right hand side, I have the intranet, wherein the certification authority is present or the CA is present, right? Obviously, it is there in the intranet, right? And then I have a device, I have a server, which can be 2008, 2012, 2016, 2019, doesn't matter. And in this server, I have to install a component, and that component is called Intune connector. This is nothing but just a .msi, or I think it's a MSI or a exe, which we can download from the Intune portal and install it in one of the servers. Okay, and this server needs to have access to the internet as well, meaning this server needs to be able to talk to the Intune service. Okay, so this is all the components that we need for a PKCS deployment to work. Obviously, we need the Intune service. Obviously, there is a mobile device. The mobile device is enrolled to the Intune service. Obviously, we have the certification authority, and we need just one more server wherein we have to install a MSI, which is called the Intune connector. Okay, this is the entire setup that we need. Not very much complicated. So if we have the setup, then let's just talk about what is the flow. The flow is going to be something like this. in the Intune service or in the Intune portal, we first make a profile. Okay, this profile is like a policy. So the what again? Why are we doing this, or what exactly is the end goal? The end goal here is we are moving a certificate from the intranet, from the CA in the intranet to the Intune to a device in the internet, right? So what we have done is we have made a profile in the Intune service, and the first step is this profile comes down to the device. Okay, just like any policy, I mean, if we compare it with something like, let's just say SCCM, once we make a profile or a policy in SCCM console, the policy comes down to the device, right? Now it uses the SCCM client to leverage it. In this case, in the device, we will be having something like a company portal application. So the first step is the profile comes down to the device. Now that profile contains a lot of information. It contains the name of the certification authority. So in the certification authority, there would be a certificate template which we would have created, right? And that certificate template is going to issue the certificates. So all these information is present in this profile. But the challenge here is when once this profile comes down to the device, let's just say that this device got the policy. This device cannot directly go and talk with the certification authority, right? Because this device does not know where the certificate authority is. So what happens is in the second step, the device goes back and talks to the Intune service. So the device got the profile, the PKCS profile. Now the device will go back and talk to the Intune service and will ask for help. It will say that, you know what, I've got this profile. I don't know what to do with it. Now Intune service will act as a middleman or a broker, and then the Intune service will talk to the Intune connector, which we have already installed. So that is step 3, wherein the Intune service is talking to the Intune connector, which has already been installed and installed in one of the on-prem servers as a part of the initial setup that we did. Okay. The Intune connector will then talk to the certification authority. And in the profile, we had already mentioned the name of the certificate authority. So the Intune connector is going to fetch that certificate authority name and the name of the template. So that is the step 4, wherein the Intune connector talks to the CA. It tallies with it the name of the certification authority and the template. The CA is going to issue the certificate. That is step 5. So the CA issues the certificate. It comes back to the Intune connector. And the step 6 is from the Intune connector, it goes back to the Intune service. The certificate is stored here in the Intune on the Azure storage blob, or it's a storage location if you would call it. And then the certificate is pushed down to the device, because now the device knows where because now the Intune service knows where the device is. So this would be 1,000 feet overview of what are the components involved, and then what is the flow. Now obviously, I have not spoken about the authentication part. That is at which point of time the authentication is happening and what logs to check. So let's just say that the 7-part flow is failing or is breaking at some point, right? So where exactly and how exactly to check it. So for that, we would need to know the logs, what logs to check, what logs can we check over here, what logs can we check over here, and how can we track that certificate. This is something that we'll be talking later on, but this would be again 1,000 feet overview of the components and the flow. And I mean, it is not that difficult to understand, right? The device gets a profile. The device does not know what to do with it, so the device goes back to the Intune service. The Intune service talks to the Intune connector. The Intune connector talks to the CA. The CA issues the certificate and brings it back to the Intune connector and then to the Intune service. Okay. All right. Well, this is again a documentation of the flow. The admin creates the PKCS profile. The profile reaches to the device, but the device has got no idea what to do with it. The device then reaches back to the Intune service. Intune service acts as the middleman. The Intune service fetches the configuration from the PKCS profile, connects to the on-premise Intune certificate connector, request for a certificate. CA will issue the certificate, move it back to the connector, and then it will be uploaded. So, I mean, again, from Intune service to the device, the profile will come down. The device will talk back to the Intune service. The Intune service will talk to the Intune connector. The Intune connector will go to the CA and ask for the certificate. CA will issue it and push it back to the Intune connector. The Intune connector will upload it in the Intune service, and the Intune service will deploy it back to the device. I know I'm not helping with the way the diagram was looking, but I mean this would be a understanding of the flow. Okay. So what does the profile contain? I already told you guys the profile that we're creating over here This profile contains the name of the certification authority, the FQDN of the CA, the name of the template which we intend to use, which is going to be used to issue the certificates, as well as it contains the subject name and the subject alternative name of the. So let's just say that there's a certificate which I want to be issued, right? It can be issued to the user, it can be issued to the device, it can be issued to the device name, it can be issued to the serial number of the device, it can be issued to any attribute, right? So that is what we determine under the subject name and the subject alternative. And we can also determine in which store we want to store the, in which store of a Windows device we want to place that certificate. So when you are opening up the MMC in a Windows 10 device, you have the personal container as well as the system container, right? And inside of that you have different containers. So in the profile itself, you guys can determine in which store you want to place that certificate. Okay, these are all the attributes that you will be defining when you are making a PKCS profile. Now it talks about what is the configuration that we make on-prem. Well, again, I'll go back to the diagram. What is the configuration that we are making on-prem? Obviously, the CA needs to be there. The certificate template needs to be created and it needs to have the appropriate permissions. And the Intune connector needs to be installed on a server, which needs to have access to the CA as well as it needs to be able to talk to the Intune server. Okay, so again, very standard setup. So step one is installing the Intune connector, and then the connector runs with the account. So we have to configure it to run with the service account. And then we have to create a certificate template and the CA, and we have to publish it. And when we are creating that certificate template, there's one thing that we need to keep in mind. As I said at the beginning, in case of PKCS, the private key is marked as exportable, right? So this is a determination that we have to make, and we have to make sure that we are selecting this option. It is just a radio button or a checkbox that we need to check, and we have to make sure that the private key is allowed to be exported. Okay. So, well, again, just for your reference, this is a registry location. Once we install the Intune connector, this is where we see it. So the Intune connector actually comes up with the name NDS plugin. So this is the location wherein you will be able to see the connector location. Okay. So now let's just say that I mean, again, it was a pretty standard setup. The Intune admin, all the Intune admin did was create a profile, right, in the Intune portal. And the on-prem admin just created the Intune connector. I mean, installed the Intune connector, right? The CA would already be there, and the end user enrolled a device, right? So let's just say everything was done, and the certificate did not come to the device, right? Or the certificate did come to the device. Then how exactly do we track it, right? I mean, there has to be so the way we are going to track it is going to correlate with the flow that we just now discussed. So the tracking of a successful deployment would be something like this. First, obviously, the first point would be the certificate would come down to the device if and only if the CA issued it to begin with, right? So this is where we can check at the very first time whether the CA has issued it or not. And if the CA has issued it, there are a couple of logs that we can check. We can check the ndes.svc log, which I'll show you guys where that is and what that contains. We can check the PFX log. We can check the company portal logs in case of an Android or an iOS device. In case of Windows device, we can check the store as well as the event logs. I'll be showing you guys where to check that. Okay, whether the CA has issued it or not, well, again, this is very standard. So all we have to do is open up the MMC in the CA, and we have to go into the issued certificate tabs. So this shows you guys all the certificates that has been issued by the CA, right? And over there, if you can see that, okay, there is a certificate which has been issued by the CA to the user using the certificate template which we configured, then we know for sure that our deployment is working fine, right? And then obviously we can check the timestamp and make sure that, let's just say I enrolled the device right now, so it should have the correct timestamp, right? Again, if you go to the details section of the certificate, you can see what is the thumbprint of the certificate. And if you go into, there is something called EKU, or enhanced key usage. So this enhanced key usage of a certificate should contain something called client authentication. I mean, what in the beginning we discussed, guys, what is the end goal here? The end goal is we are moving a certificate to a mobile device so that that mobile device can leverage that certificate and connect to a Wi-Fi or connect to a VPN, right? So that certificate is something which the device is using to prove its authenticity. Therefore, in the EKU of the certificate, it should have something called client authentication, meaning that the certificate has the ability of representing the user and proving his authenticity. Okay, this is something that we can see at the CA's end. The second thing that I spoke about was the index.svc log, right? This is one of the logs that we can check, and this is a very verbose log which talks about everything that is going on. So in this log, you can actually see that it is generating the SAN value, and the SAN value is equal to the username who has enrolled the device. And over here, you can see the device ID of the device which is going to get that certificate, and you can see the thumbprint of the certificate as well. This is one of the logs which is showing you guys that okay, there was a request which came, and whether that request was successfully processed or not, and against which user. You can see the username over here, and if it was, then against which device. You can see the device ID over here, and if it was processed successfully, then you can see the thumbprint of the certificate over here. So here you can see that a certificate. So this is another log. It is the PFX log. So if I go back here, the second log that I talked about was the PFX log, right? So this is the location of that log: C drive, program files, Microsoft Intune, PFX request. And over here, you can see there is a thumbprint section which talks about the thumbprint of the certificate which has been issued to the end device. It's ending with 6A. Okay. Over here, you can see the username and you can see the device ID as well. So this is exactly how a successful movement, or this is how we will be tracking a successful flow of log. First, we'll be checking the indexconnected.svc log, which is going to show us the flow. And then over here, we can see whether a certificate was generated or not, what is the thumbprint, and to what user it has been issued to. And then finally, we have something called company portal log. In case of Android or iOS device, there is that company portal agent that we install. And then from that company portal agent, we can generate the log. So this is again from the end user's device. And if we check that log, we can also see the thumbprint of the same certificate. So it's the same certificate which we saw in the previous slide, ending with 6A. So I can see in the company portal logs at the end device that it received a certificate ending with 6A, and the certificate was successfully installed in the device. So let's just say that I made a profile. Again, let's just recap a little. Let's just say I made a profile, everything was done fine, but I cannot see the certificate in the device, right? So we wouldn't be checking the company portal logs the first thing, right? Because it doesn't make sense. The first thing we'll check is whether the CA issued it or not, because the certificate obviously will not come down in the device and the company portal logs will not show it if the CA did not issue it at the first place, right? So it is just going to be in accordance with the flow that we have discussed. In case of Windows device, there's an event view log that you can check. This is that location. Application and services log, Microsoft Windows certificate service client lifecycle. So if I go over there to the operational tab over here, I can see that a new certificate has been installed, and I can see the thumbprint of that certificate as well. Okay, so this thumbprint would match with the thumbprint of the certificate we saw in the previous two logs, as well as the thumbprint of the certificate which we saw in the CA. Okay, so this is one of the logs that we can, because obviously we don't have the company portal application in the Windows 10 device, so that would be, so that logging would be done in the event viewer, right? This would be a location we can probably check. Once the certificate is down in the device, in case of a Windows 10 machine, well, obviously we know where to check it. We just have to open up the MMC, and then in the certificate store, I can see that a certificate is there. And if I go into the details tab, I can see the thumbprint of that certificate. So, again, this is very standard. We just opened up the MMC in the Windows 10 device to track the certificates present in the device in the current user store. Okay. In case of iOS, how do we track it? We just, obviously, if the device is enrolled, we can see the management profile. So we click on that management profile, and then we can see the certificate. If we click on that certificate, we can see the serial number, the validity, and we can also see the key identifier. The key identifier is the thumbprint of the certificate. Okay. In case of Android device, by default, it does not show us the certificate which is there in the device. So for that, we have to install an application called My Certificate app. It is a free application. It is a free application available in the Play Store. You can just download it from there, and if you download that so by default, the Android operating system doesn't have privilege or access to the store wherein the certificate is present, but this application does. So you just have to install this application, and then it will show you the template of the certificate which is there in the device. Okay. So once everything is done, obviously Intune will also show that the certificate and the profile has successfully reached the device. So all you have to do is click on the device and then go to the device status. And then you can see that the status of that PKCS profile is showing as succeeded, meaning the Intune service pushed that profile, the device got that profile, and then the device spoke to the Intune service and notified that I got the profile that you pushed on. Okay. So again, this is again a 1,000 feet overview of how it's supposed to be done. PKCS again does not have so many moving components, and if we talk about the components, it just has 4, right? Intune service, device, Intune connector, and the certification authority. Okay. So now we are going to, I know that this is too much to take in one session, but if we don't talk about SCEP, then we wouldn't know what is the difference between SCEP and PKCS. So now I'm going to talk about SCEP, and we are going to understand how is it different from PKCS. So SCEP is, again, it's also a protocol. It stands for Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol. It was originally developed by Cisco, but now again, it's an open standard. And the end goal of using a SCEP certificate is again the same. The end goal is we are moving a certificate from a on-premise CA, which is there in the intranet, to a device in the internet, so that that device can use that certificate to connect to, let's just say, Wi-Fi or VPN or email encryption. Okay. The only difference, or one of the difference that we need to keep in mind is, if you guys remember, I highlighted it when we were talking about PKCS as well, that it has the private key, but the private key is not marked as exportable. Okay, we will again talk about how we do that, but this is something that we need to keep in mind because it is one of the differentiating factors between SCEP and PKCS. All right. So how does it work with Intune? Again, we enroll a device, the device is enrolled to Intune, the device gets the profile, and once the device gets the profile, again, there would be a flow. The flow is a little different from the flow that we saw in case of PKCS. The end goal again is the device gets the certificate, and then the device leverages that certificate to connect to Wi-Fi or to VPN. In this case, we'll be seeing that there are a lot more components involved. In the previous case, we saw there were only 4. However, in this case, there are a lot more. So over here, we will see that there is the Intune service, and which is working as the MDM. There is a SCEP profile, just like we made a PKCS profile in the previous case. There is a SCEP profile that we make over here. There is an end user's device, which is going to get the certificate. There is an on-premise CA and the DC. All these 4 components were there in the previous case as well. However, in case of SCEP, there is an additional component that we introduced that is called the NDES server. Now, NDES stands for Network Device Enrollment Service, and it is a role that we install in the server. When I say a role, we can install. So let's just say I have to make a domain controller, right? How do I do it? I install a role in the device, right, which is ADDS. Similarly, if I have to install the NDES, how do I do that? I go to the server manager, and from there, I install the NDES role. This is not a EXE or a MSI that I'm installing. This is something which is already there inbuilt in the operating system. I'm just activating it. Just like you install an IIS role or a ADDS role, you can install the NDES role as well from the server manager. And this is something that you need to install. And there is something called an Intune connector. We had that in the previous PKCS setup as well. We have an Intune connector over here as well. And there is one more additional component, which is called app proxy. We'll talk about what app proxy is and why it is needed. But again, 1,000-feet overview of the components involved in SCEP. These would be the components involved. And if we compare this with the components involved in PKCS, you will be seeing that there are 2 additional components. One is the NDES server, and one is the Azure app. I mean, it can be any app proxy. I mean, Azure app proxy is a free proxy, so I mean, you can use that as well. So this slide again, I know it's not the prettiest looking slide, but it is again a breakdown or a block diagram of the flow that is going to happen in case of a SCEP certificate delivery. Okay. So again, what I did was I made a profile. This time, instead of making a PKCS profile, I made a SCEP profile in the Intune service. So step one is the SCEP profile comes down to the device. Okay. The device has the SCEP profile, and the device now needs to talk to the CA in order to get a certificate. But the device cannot directly talk to the CA because obviously the CA is there in the intranet and the device is there in the internet. So what happens is the device talks to something called a proxy server. Okay. And this proxy server is responsible for redirecting all the requests from the internet to the NDES. Okay. And this NDES server is something, an additional component that I talked about. And this NDES server has access to the internet as well as to the intranet. Okay. So again, let's just recap a little. I made a profile. The profile came down to the device in the first step. The second step is the device reaches out to something called a Azure app proxy or a proxy server. The proxy server redirects that request to the NDES server. That is the step 4. The NDES server has a lot of components within it. I'm not going to talk about those components, but let's just say that the NDES server has 3 components, wherein it does its wherein it checks and makes sure that the request is coming from a authentic user and it is meeting all the prerequisites that it is supposed to meet. Let's just say everything is there in place, then the NDES server in the step 5 will process that request and send it to the CA. The CA will again use a certificate template which was already created, and it will use that certificate template and issue a certificate. The certificate will come back to the NDES server. From the NDES server, it will go back to the Intune service in step 7, and in step 8, it will come down to the device. Okay. So this would be again a 1,000-feet overview of how the processing is working in case of SCEP. So if we compare this with something like PKCS, we saw that in case of PKCS, the device was only talking to the Intune service, and Intune service was talking to the Intune connector, and then it was taking it forward. In case of SCEP, the device directly reaches out to the NDES server via something called Azure App Proxy or Web Application Proxy or any kind of proxy that you would like to have in your environment. And once the device talks to the NDES server, so the device is talking to the NDES server, right? So obviously there has to be a role, and that role is IIS. We have to install IIS in the NDES server, which hosts a web URL, if you would call it. And there are a couple of other components also which gets activated in the NDES server, which does its due diligence, and it just makes sure that that the request is coming from authenticated user and whatnot. But whatever authentication it has to do, it does that. Once it is done, the request goes back to the CA, and the authentication is done. Okay. All right. So now let's just do a comparison between PKCS and SCEP. If I talk about PKCS, we saw that there was no NDES server involved. There was nothing called Azure App Proxy. There was no IIS, no public endpoint. Nothing was there. All we did in case of PKCS was, let me just go back to the diagram again. All we did in case of PKCS was we had a device. We already had the CA. Every enterprise organization will be having it. All I did was I went to a server and I installed the Intune connector. That's it. That's all the prerequisite, or that's all the setup that needs to be done. However, if I talk about SCEP, in case of SCEP, there are a few added components as well. I need a server where I need to install the NDES role. In the server itself, I install the connector, the same connector which I installed in case of PKCS. IIS needs to be installed and configured. A couple of other parameters also needs to be configured. I need to install something called an Azure App Proxy. The Azure App Proxy will do the redirection of the URLs when the device try to. So whenever the device hit the Azure App Proxy, I mean, what exactly is a proxy? Proxy takes the request, forwards it someplace, right? That is exactly what the proxy is going to do. The device is going to talk to the proxy. Proxy is just going to forward it to the NS server, right? So over here, you can see that there are a lot more components involved. It has the NS server, it has the proxy, and obviously if there are a lot more components involved, there will be a lot more logs that we can check, right? So if I talk about the logs that we can check in this case, what would those be? We can check whether the CA issued a certificate or not in the same place. We can check the IIS log. There is something called the NDES plugin. We can check those log as well. There is another component which gets involved again. I'm not going to go into the very detail of that, but I mean, it's just a good to know information. There is another component which gets installed called the CRP. So we can check the IIS log, we can check the NDES plugin log, we can check the CRP log. What I'm trying to say here, guys, is when we have to track a successful or an unsuccessful certificate deployment for SCEP, it is going to collate or correlate with the flow that we saw over here. We can check in the proxy logs, we can check in the IIS logs, we can check in the CA. Again, we can check in the NDES server log that whether the certificate came down or not. Then we can again go to the Intune service and check the deployment status. And then we can check in the device whether the device got it or not. Right? Okay, so we were talking about the differences between PKCS and SCEP. So in case of PKCS, you guys saw that there is no NDES, no app proxy, no IIS. In case of PKCS, we were seeing that, in case of PKCS, we were seeing that the device was talking to the Intune service and the Intune service was talking as the middleman. And it has obviously a smaller footprint. By a smaller footprint, what I mean is the only component that we're installing is the Intune connector in one of the servers. In case of SCEP, we saw that we have to install the IIS, we have to make use of the app proxy, we have to install a component called NDES in the server, we have to install an NDES server. And in case of SCEP, the private key never leaves the device. So again, this is something that I have spoken about a couple of times. So this is something which makes SCEP more secured as compared to PKCS. Because in case of SCEP, the private key is not marked as exportable. So in case of SCEP, the private key is not marked as exportable. However, in case of PKCS, this private key is marked as exportable, which makes SCEP more secured because, well, the private key is not traveling over the wire, right? Okay. All right. So I guess that is pretty much that I had in the slides. Let me now first check if we have anything in the chat or not. And then probably I would open it up for you guys to take questions. Okay. I see we have a lot of, not a lot of questions, few questions. And does CA DC needs to install on the same server? Very good question here. So CA and DC can be on the same server, right? I mean, it is up to us. In an enterprise environment, CA and DC might not be on the same server, but it is up to you, right? CA and DC can be on the same server, but NDES cannot be on the same server as CA. This is something that you need to keep in mind. Yes, okay, I'll be sharing the log location. But first, if I answer this question, whether NDES and CA can be on the same server or not, it cannot be. Okay, and in an enterprise organization, even if you could, you wouldn't be having it, right? Because as I said, NDES server talks to the Intune service, right? So how will the NDES server talk to the Intune service? It will only talk to the Intune service if the NDES server has access to the internet. So in an enterprise organization, we usually wouldn't be giving internet connectivity to the certification authority, right? But I mean, even if you wanted to, you cannot have the NDES role installed and configured in the same server as the CA for Intune. For other MDMs like AirWatch, I'm not exactly sure whether it works or not, but for Intune, NDES and CA cannot be in the same server. SCEP works in HTTP and PKCS works in HTTPS. Both of them work in HTTPS. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Anup sir answered that as well. Okay. NDES server log location. The log location is C drive, program files, Microsoft Intune. When you go inside Microsoft Intune, there will be a folder called NDES Connector SVC. We'll be going inside NDES Connector SVC, and there will be a folder called logs. We'll go inside that logs, and we will be having the logs that I just showed to you guys. Okay, this would be the answer to the questions which were there in the chat. Now if you guys have any questions, you guys can bring those questions up. But let me just share with you guys the link to the URLs. I have done a deep dive, and these deep dive contains everything from setup to the troubleshooting of the logs. I know that what we discussed on this session was, again, I mean, there's only so much that we can discuss on a 60-minute call, right? But if you're interested in much more, then this talks about how to set it up right from scratch. Okay. All right. So now if you guys have questions, you guys can go ahead one by one.
You told like NDS services can be enabled on the machine, like using services.msc you'll enable, or how you will
No,
enable?
from server manager. You have to go to the server, like you install the ADDS role. Similarly, you have to install the NDS role. Okay. It's a role. So from the server manager, you can install roles and features, right? So similarly, like you install the ADDS role, right? Similarly, if you have to install the NDS, what you have to do is, so NDS comes under the CA role. So what you have to do, you have to open the server manager, and then you have to install the CA role. Okay. Once you have installed the CA role, you will do next finish, and then you will reboot the machine. Once you have installed the CA role, what is the second thing that you have to do? You have to configure the CA role, right? Like, let's just say you want to install, let's just not talk about NDS, let's just first talk about CA. Let's just say you want to install a certification authority. How do you do it? You first go into the server manager, you install the CA, you reboot the server, and then you configure the CA. When you configure the CA, you determine whether it is going to be a standalone CA or an enterprise CA or what kind of CA, right? Similarly, if you have to install and configure NDS, first you have to go to the server manager, first you have to install the CA role, reboot the machine. But when you're going to configure it, you are not going to configure CA, you are going to configure part of CA, which is called NDS. Okay, so to answer your question, it is configured from the server manager.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there is again a question. NDS will be needed for hybrid domain join or AAD join. I am not exactly sure I followed the question. Would you kindly elaborate on the question here? I don't know who is this person who wrote this question. Anyways, why the return communication is not going through app proxy in SCEP? Because it doesn't need to, right? I mean, why do you need to go through the Azure app proxy when you're returning? Let me just go back over here. The CA does not need to go back to the, because Azure, let's just say that the CA issued a certificate, right? Now, if the CA talks to the Azure app proxy, the app proxy cannot store the certificate anywhere, right? So the CA issues a certificate, it goes to the NDS server. The NDS server talks to the Intune service, and the certificate is stored in the Intune service, or if you would call it a Azure storage blob. It is a storage location wherein the certificate is stored momentarily, and the Intune service deploys that certificate down to the device. The Azure app proxy can only redirect URLs. The Azure app proxy cannot move a certificate which is issued by the CA to a device. The Azure app proxy, what is a proxy? A proxy is something like, there is, I mean, I can say that whatever comes and hits A will be redirected to B. That is what proxy does, right? It does redirection. But proxy cannot deliver a certificate issued by the CA, right? So I hope that answers the question. Need to purchase license for both? No, there is no license needed for any of this. NDS server, I mean, again, it is just a role that you are installing. All you need is the Intune license. If you have the Intune license, no other licenses needed. Nothing else is needed. You're just installing a role, configure. So if, I mean, let's just compare this with, let's just say you're installing the ADDS role. Do you need any licenses for that? You don't, right? So similarly, instead of ADDS role, you are installing a NDS role, right? So there is no licenses which is needed for that. The only license that is needed is the license used to enroll the device to Intune. That is the EMS E3 or E5 license. Okay. All right. Ports, proxies, which is needed to open device. Okay. How do you track enter certificate expiry date and set alert to notify admins? Okay. A good question. How do you track NDS certificate expiry date? So when we are making the NDS profile, over there we have an option to set the renewal period. So by default, the renewal period is set to 20%. but you can change it to, let's just say 80% or 90% as well. What that would mean is, let's just say that the device got a certificate today. So at 80% of whatever the expiry date is, the device will, I mean, everything, the entire process will seamlessly happen again. The admin will not have to do anything, and that certificate will be renewed by the CA. Okay, this is a configuration that you make in the SCEP profile, wherein you determine what is going to be the renewal threshold. Okay. All right. Did I miss any questions? Okay. Ports proxy, which is needed to be opened for device, and the Azure app proxy communication. Okay. So the device is there on the internet, right? So, I mean, there is no, so I'm assuming if the device is there in the internet, there is no other, I mean, there is no proxy, I mean, there is no port that you have to specifically open. But if the device is there in the intranet, then yes, I can share with you the documentation. I believe the only port that needs to be open is ATN 443. But yes, I can share with you the documentation. Okay, so I think I got all the questions. So you guys can speak up if you guys have any other questions or if your questions were not answered.
Hi, sir.
Yeah.
In the vendor's point of view, we don't need an Intune connector, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I right, or it's something we need an Intune connector as well?
I'm sorry, would you please come again?
No. When we speak about PKCS, there we are
Uh-huh.
installing an Intune connector between
Right.
Intune and a CA authority. But
Right.
when it comes to the SCEP point of view, we are not installing Intune connector, right?
No, we are installing Intune connector in both the cases. Let me just show you guys the diagram again. So over here also we have installed the Intune connector. This is the Intune connector. I probably should have written it over here. So yes, over here also we are installing the Intune connector, but then again it will bring us the basic question that if we are installing the Intune connector in both the cases, what is the difference? So when you install the Intune connector, after you've installed it, you have to configure it. Okay. When you're configuring the Intune connector, you just have to provide a service account which the connector is going to use. But before you provide that service account, there is a radio button which you have to select. That radio button is where you make that determination, whether you are going to use that connector for SCEP or whether you are going to use that connector for PKCS. So if you are going to use it for SCEP, you select the SCEP option in the radio button while you're configuring the Intune connector. If you are going to use it for PKCS, you select the PKCS radio button while you're configuring the Intune connector. But to answer your question, the Intune connector is installed in both the cases.
Okay. And one more question.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to deploy a PKCS to set of machines and SCEP to set of machines, so do I need to perform two Intune connectors to be installed, or one will be performed the same?
Yes, you will have to install two different certificate connectors. One will be in the first certificate connector. When you're configuring it, you will be selecting the PKCS option. In the second connector, you will be selecting the SCEP option. And from the Intune service, obviously, you will be making two different profiles. Right? The first profile will be for.
Unfortunately, okay, got it. Unfortunately, if I deploy a PKC and SCEP both certificates to the same machine, what certificate will take precedence and how the communication will happen?
Okay, so if you deploy both, the device will get two certificates. One from PKCS, one from SCEP, right? Right.
Correct.
Okay, so now let's just say the device has got both the certificates. Now let's just say you want to use the first certificate for VPN and the second certificate PKCS not support. Okay, let me just answer your question first. Okay, so let's just say you made two certificates, I mean two profiles, one for PKCS, one for SCEP. Both will come down to the device. Okay, so let's just say you want to use the first certificate for Wi-Fi and the second certificate for VPN. Okay, again you can set that up also. So from Intune, what you can do, you can create a Wi-Fi profile also, and from Intune you can create a VPN profile also. So once you're creating the Wi-Fi profile, you can link that Wi-Fi profile to the SCEP profile, which means that when the Wi-Fi profile comes down to the device, the Wi-Fi profile knows that this device also has a SCEP certificate, and it will automatically fetch that SCEP certificate and connect to the Wi-Fi. And you can deploy a VPN profile also, so that when the VPN profile comes down to the device knows that there is another PKCS certificate which it needs to use in order to connect to the VPN. So what I'm trying to explain here is, if in the device you have deployed both SCEP and PKCS to different profiles, both will come down to the device. And it's not like there is nothing like a preference or precedence in this case, or a priority. The device has both the certificates. Now it is up to you which one you want to use for what. Does that answer your query?
Yes, Saurabh. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Are the Intune connectors required install on both CA and NDES server? No. The Intune connector needs to be installed on a server. Now that server can be the NDES server, that server can be the CA server, that server can, I mean, obviously it can be, I mean, as I said, for Intune, NDES and CA both cannot be the same, right? So the CA is a different server. In our case, we have an NDES server, and the NDES server, we have installed the Intune connector. Okay. So I hope that this answers this question. PKCS not support for iOS and Android, which one? Okay, PKCS not support for iOS and Android, which one best option? Okay, so PKCS supports both iOS and Android. So you can make a PKCS profile, you can deploy it to Android. You can make a PKCS profile, you can deploy it to iOS. Now, which one to use? Well, obviously, as I said, in case of PKCS, the private key is marked as exportable. In case of SCEP, the private key is not marked as exportable. Therefore, SCEP is more secure than PKCS. But then again, in the setup also, we saw that in case of PKCS, the only component that we're installing is the connector. In case of SCEP, we need to have the Azure App Proxy and an NDES server, which means that we need to have 2 additional servers, right? So if you can have 2 servers in your environment, you might as well go ahead and make use of SCEP. If not, then you might as well go ahead with PKCS. But as far as supportability is concerned, PKCS can be deployed to all the 4 operating systems: Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. And SCEP can also be deployed to all the 4 operating systems. Okay, PKCS is easy to manage. SCEP, yeah, absolutely. SCEP is way more. SCEP has got a lot more moving components. So yeah, we have Apple push notification as well. Will that not be used to? No. So Apple push notification certificate or the APNS is something which is deployed to the device, because, okay, let's just say I have a MDM. So that MDM cannot directly talk. Let's just say I have Intune or any MDM, Intune or AirWatch or something like that, right? So my MDM cannot directly talk with an iOS device. There is a man in the middle called the APNS, which is introduced by Apple, and Apple says that no MDM can directly talk over devices. It has to be via APNS. So if I'm making any policy in my MDM, that policy first goes, that policy cannot directly go to the device. It goes via APNS, if you would call it, right? So, but that APNS certificate cannot be used for authentication to Wi-Fi or VPN or email encryption, right? Right now, because that certificate, that APNS certificate, is not issued by your on-prem CA. Right now, we are talking about a certificate which is issued by your on-prem CA, which can be used by the device to authenticate to Wi-Fi or VPN, right? How would you use APNS certificate to authenticate to your corporate Wi-Fi or VPN, because your on-prem CA did not issue the certificate to begin with? Right? I hope that this answers your question.
Yes, sir.
So if there are any other questions, you guys can speak up, because I do not see any other questions in the chat. So I guess not. Anup sir, I guess we are done before time then.
Saurabh, I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
So, what is the best option, the cost-effective wise, using SCEP or PKCS?
You can use SCEP if you can have those 2 servers, the NDES server and the App Proxy server. So the bigger enterprise environment, I mean, again, I wouldn't make that generalization. But then again, I mean, if you want a more secured environment, you would probably go with SCEP, right? Because, well, the private key is not marked as exportable in case of SCEP, right? So again, that's a determination which your network admin or your CA admin has to make, whether they can have those uh, additional components in their on-prem or not, whether they can have a different server which has the Azure App Proxy installed, whether they can have a different server which has the NDES role installed or not. But from security point of view, yes, I would take the liberty of saying that SCEP is more secure because the private key is not exportable.
Just to add on
Okay.
that,
Thank you.
so I tried to deploy PKCS initially, and our security team didn't like that because of the same reason which Saurabh mentioned. And it's up to your organization and your organizational politics, right? If you can convince your security team to use PKCS, then that is the best option.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
Okay, so if we don't have any further questions, we are going to end this meeting for today. And
Just a small question. Might be it's a repeated one or no. That is basically question. Okay, when we say we are redirecting the request from a proxy, in generally when we configure any proxy pack over the network, those requests will go via firewall, right? In a firewall, we already opening ATM port TCP request. Is there any special thing that we need to open during the proxy configuration? I mean, do we need to mention any special port also over the proxy configuration?
Well, as far as I'm aware, it only uses the port 443 and port 80. That's all that needs to be opened inbound in the server wherein you have installed the Azure App Proxy or the Web Application Proxy, whichever you're making use of.
How about the outbound room? Because the two-way communication should happen, right?
No, I mean, where exactly is it outbound? I mean, it is only redirecting the traffic to the NDES server, right?
Yes.
Via the proxy. From the NDES, it is not going to the Azure App Proxy.
Okay, so
Money,
got it.
Money, it's only the end app proxy. App proxy is the magic over here, right?
Yeah,
so
got
if you are not using app proxy, then you need to open a set of ports, right?
Yes.
So to directly to your CA and all the other certificate authority servers, right? That is similar to internet management of clients, right? But
Correct.
app proxy is doing a lot of magic over there. That is why we just need those two ports, I feel.
Okay. Thanks.
Saurabh, Sujit here.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you explain more about some 3 plugins available in NDES servers? You are telling about IAS and NDES plugin and one CRP.
Yeah. So what happens is when you install the NDES role, when you configure it along with the NDES role, the IIS role also gets installed in the server, right? And well, obviously, as I said, there is an Intune connector also that you need to install in the NDES server in the same server. When you install that, the CRP role and the NDES plugin role gets installed. So what happens is in case of SCEP, if you read a little about it, the SCEP, the way the protocol is designed is it works on challenge and response to the challenge protocol. So that is what exactly is going to happen in the CRP log. You can actually see the 3 phases of the challenge, and if in those 3 phases of challenge, it actually authenticates and makes sure that the request is coming from a user who has already been authenticated. And if that is the case, then it checks the expiry and it checks. I mean, there are 3 or 4 checks which the CRP is going to do. And when you're installing the NDES plugin, the plugin actually creates a pool in the IIS which it is going to use. So I again would not go into very detail of this. This is the way SCEP is working. But yeah, I mean, I've explained that everything in the link that I shared. But yeah, I mean, if you want to understand how exactly, what exactly is the authentication that is happening, probably you can go through that. Probably you can read a little bit about how SCEP works. I mean, ideally this would be outside the scope of Intune, because I mean, you can use SCEP outside Intune as well, right? I mean, as I said, SCEP is a protocol. You can use that with Intune. You can use that without Intune. You can use a SCEP to deploy certificates to domain joined devices, right? And in that case, you don't need Intune. You can configure it in other way as well. But yeah, to answer your question, the 3 components that I was talking about in the NDES server is the IIS, which gets installed with the NDES service role. The second is the CRP, and which is certificate registration point, and the third one is the NDES plugin, which gets installed when you're installing the Intune connector. And each of them have their own usage. So IIS is like whenever, so as I said, the device hits the app proxy, and the app proxy forwards it to the IIS. So you'll be able, and a website, so you will see that in a way a website opens up, it gives you a 403 error, a 403 forbidden error, and then that gets logged in the IIS. Again, as I said, the NDES plugin installs a role, not exactly a role, installs a pool in the IIS, which it leverages, and it then does its authentication, whatever kind of authentication it is supposed to do before it forwards the request to the CA to issue the template that it is going to use. So, I mean, if you want more details into this, I mean, I've shared the link in the chat. Probably you can go through that. It's a 4-hour long video. So probably it will help you understand what is the authentication happening at each phase.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Saurabh, this is Krish here.
Sure.
Again, from Intune autopilot perspective, like for AD scenario, where this SCEP is coming into the picture, because I think one way is VPN profile can be deployed. I mean, how that can be integrated, or can we use the SCEP for deploying the VPN profile during autopilot?
Okay, so are you talking about the feature that is going to be released, that is hybrid autopilot over VPN?
Not the hybrid scenario, for the AD complete AD joint scenario, because there also it needs certificates, and there's no other mechanism, right, to get the certificate. Or can we use this SCEP? I was just thinking, I'm not sure.
I mean, we are using this SCEP profile to connect to your on-premise Wi-Fi or to connect to your on-premise VPN, right?
Yeah.
So if you are doing a Azure AD join or hybrid Azure AD join of a Windows 10 machine, does at any point of time the machine connect to Wi-Fi or to VPN? It doesn't, right? So, I mean, to make use of hybrid Azure AD join, all you do is the device is already joined to the on-prem domain, and you configure the Azure AD Connect, which does the hybrid Azure AD join of the device, right? If you're talking about a normal hybrid Azure AD join, now if you're talking about hybrid Azure AD join autopilot, in that case, you install a separate connector again, that would be something very different. So, are you talking about hybrid Azure AD join autopilot?
Yeah, I understand that different connector. That's a AD connector.
Right.
I was talking about AAD scenario, where it needs certificate for one is VPN profile, I feel, and another is for Wi-Fi profile. So can this SCEP be used there?
Absolutely. If you need to connect to Wi-Fi or to VPN, you can anytime use this certificate. This is just going to automate the authentication to that VPN or to Wi-Fi. So you can use this.
Okay.
Just to add on that, Chris. So this is Anup here. In my experience, right, for my organization, we are using SCEP certificate through autopilot scenario, right? So when we do a autopilot enrollment, AAD join enrollment, we deploy SCEP profile, and that will be used to connect to Wi-Fi and para VPN at a later stage once the device is enrolled entirely. So that is the exact use case where it will be helpful.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So.
Thanks, Anup. Yeah, I would like to check that.
Okay, so do you have any other questions? We will wait for another 2 minutes, and then we will finish off before we end the session. Thank you very much, Saurabh, and the virtual claps for Saurabh. So
Thank you, sir.
it's always been great. All your sessions were great. So thank you so much for the contribution to the community, and
Absolutely, sir.
hope all of us, all of you, like participants, like the content, and please appreciate Saurabh, and check out his YouTube channel. So lot of great videos available there. Please do subscribe. Right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Anup. So.
Thank you, Anup. Yeah, thank you, Anup. Thank you, Saurabh.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, thank you guys for joining in. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anup. Thank you, Saurabh.